So here I'm going to go through an example for the community assessment paper. So this outline has been posted on Blackboard. So I'm going to kind of walk through the outline to have just some clarification on what all I'm looking for in the assignment. Again, I provided a more detailed assignment description in one of the past lectures, probably around week 10. So maybe look around week 9 or 10 in that lecture. So here I'm just going to walk through my specific example. Obviously, I'm not going to post an example paper because that would take me a long time to write, but I'm going to kind of walk through what I'm looking for. So let's say that my evidence-based question is, what are the most effective interventions to increase the activity level of children with autism in St. Louis? So you can see that I'm looking at a specific problem within a specific population within a specific community. So I'm looking at the community of St. Louis, the population being children with autism, and the problem is exercise, activity level, etc. So this paper should be around 10 to 12 pages. You should be using at least 5 references. So you need to have a reference page with at least 5 references cited in nice APA format. And at least one of those references needs to be a scholarly paper. So some sort of peer-reviewed paper that you might have gotten off of a database or Google Scholar. If it's on Google Scholar, you should be good. It should count as a scholarly source. So the first part of your paper is the executive summary. So in my executive summary, essentially it's kind of like an abstract of a paper. It should be around a little less than a page, but it summarizes the rest of the paper. Okay, so provide the summary. It's standalone. Should be able to read it, understand everything that's going on, understand the main content of the paper, but I'm not providing any information in the executive summary that isn't also in the introduction. So you're not providing any facts in the executive summary that you wouldn't also have in the introduction. I should be able to skip the executive summary and understand the rest of the paper, and I should be able to read the executive summary and have a nice overview of the rest of the paper. So it's a standalone document. So let's think about my introduction. So in the introduction, I'm going to start with a review of the population. So of the population and of the issue. So I'm going to start with talking about what is autism, what's the percent of children with autism who engage in exercise. I'll talk about how children with autism engage in less exercise. They have a larger risk of being overweight and obese than typically developing children. I'll talk about why that is. So what's risk factors for exercise? It might be that children with autism have less access to exercise. It might be that they prefer more stationary activities such as playing video games. Those are all going to fall within me reviewing the population and the issue. Then I'm going to be defining my community and looking at the extent of the issue in the community. So I might provide a background on St. Louis. So this is where I'm going to be using my community description to provide some census details, how many people live in St. Louis, what percent are children, maybe some information from my needs assessment or asset map, my observations from my windshield survey when I drove around St. Louis and saw that, St. Louis was missing some streetlights. St. Louis didn't have a lot of accessible parks that are sensory friendly to kids with autism. That might be some of my observations from the windshield survey that I'm going to integrate into this. So this is all helps me to provide an overview, a big picture of the community. Then maybe I'm going to provide some specifics on how many kids in St. Louis have autism. What's the specific number? You may or may not have specific numbers for your problem. I can probably find the number of kids who live in St. Louis with autism. I may be able to pull that 30% of children with autism are overweight compared to 20% of children who don't have autism. Those numbers I'm not going to be able to pull directly about St. Louis. So don't feel that all of the numbers you're providing have to be specific to your community. That's going to be nearly impossible depending on what your problem is. But you can pull information from your scholarly references. So this is where you're pulling information from other references. So I might be able to find a scholarly reference that tells me what I will be able to find this. I will be able to find some information that tells me the number of children with autism in the general population, in some population, maybe in a North Carolina population who have autism compared to children who don't have autism. Somewhere I'm going to be able to find that. It doesn't have to be specific to St. Louis. It can be specific to Toledo or specific to North Carolina or the general U.S. population. But somewhere, some scholarly journal is going to give me an extent of the problem. Doesn't have to be from St. Louis. I'm also going to find, in my scholarly journals, I'm going to find information on how much kids with autism exercise compared to children who don't have exercise. So maybe children with autism engage in only 1 hour of exercise a week compared to children with autism who engage in 2 hours a week. So I'm providing, an overview of why this problem exists. So think about the specific reasons. What are the core reasons these problems are existing? So this is where you're asking that but why question. So I have children with autism tend to be more overweight. But why do they tend to be more overweight? Maybe it's because they're engaging in less exercise. So ask that but why to get to the core reasons that this is a problem. So I'm also going to provide some research findings, of course, on the link between autism and physical activity. So look for research findings that can help support your problem. Then I'm going to go into general information about the local political issues or the social structures that are impacting this problem. So maybe I might talk about how in St. Louis County, this political issues, St. Louis County government provides individuals with autism with recreational waivers and adaptive bikes through the Developmental Disabilities Resource Board. So St. Louis County government provides funding through the DDRB for these recreational waivers. So that is a political structure that is going to help address the problem. So the political structures can be on really either side of the issue. It can be political structures that are helping the effort, political structures that are against the effort. In this example, St. Louis County residents have access to these recreation waivers. However, St. Louis people who live within the city of St. Louis, which is a separate county for those of you who aren't familiar with the area, it's a separate county. The city of St. Louis is its own county. People who live in the city do not have access to these rec waivers. So that makes it even more difficult for children who live in the city to have funding for recreation, because kids with autism might need more one-on-one support. So they might have to pay someone, but depending on the family's social structure, how much money they have, they might not be able to afford to pay anyone. So that might be a contributing factor that individuals who live in the city of St. Louis don't have access to recreation and why they're not engaging in exercise. Then I'm going to talk about what's currently going on. So you can talk about the nonprofits who are working in this area. So talk about multiple nonprofits and what they're doing. So this is where I'm going to talk about the Recreation Council of Greater St. Louis. This is a clearinghouse that provides newsletters and information to families specifically on the different types of recreational activities that are available for individuals with disabilities. So it's a nice clearinghouse, provides parents, here's a list of everything going on in February, here's a list of all of the opportunities to get your kids engaged in recreation and in fitness. It also provides family information on the different nonprofits that are working in this area. Then I'm going to provide some very specific details on the nonprofits who are working on this area. So there are a number of nonprofits who provide recreation fitness activities for kids with autism in St. Louis. I'm going to talk about Keen, which is the nonprofit I work at, so I'm slightly biased there, but I'll talk about what they do. Spensa is special needs soccer, so it specifically provides one-on-one support for kids with a variety of disabilities to participate in soccer, so they're paired with high school students. Challenger Baseball is similar, except it provides it for baseball, so it gets kids engaging in baseball. LifeBridge is another organization that provides different rec activities for kids with disabilities. So here I'm going to talk about these specific nonprofits and what they do. So talk about, pull in their mission statement, pull in the specific programs that they offer. Then I'm going to talk about the gaps in services. So despite all of these nonprofits working in this area, what still needs to be provided? So the needs are that children who have low functioning autism in the city of St. Louis really need one-on-one support. So they lack the funding specifically for these kids. So kids who are higher functioning are maybe able to join their local soccer team without one-on-one support, but kids who are lower functioning really require having like a paraprofessional, a specific aid to help them engage in these activities. So that's what is currently missing. Then talk about how is social work related? How is community social work missing? How can they help solve the problem? And community social work can, really advocate, push the city of St. Louis to get more funding. So that's how community social work can be involved in this issue. From there, I'm going to provide recommendations on how the community can address this problem. So I'm going to pull in results from my literature search. So from your evidence-based practice workbook or from other articles that you may have read, research articles specifically on how you can engage children with autism in recreation. So maybe I'll talk about different interventions that I read about that were effective in increasing the activity level of children with autism. Maybe I read that children who receive one-on-one help from an adult are more likely to engage in recreation. That if the activities are free for families, that's going to increase participation. If the activities are unstructured rather than, having a very structured baseball game, maybe low functioning kids need more of type of a open gym activity rather than playing a very structured activity. And maybe if we're able to offer swimming is a preferred activity for kids with autism in particular. Most kids love swimming, but specifically for kids with autism, we can look at what are the preferred recreation activities for kids with autism. Swimming is one of them. Maybe kids with autism don't want to play soccer. Maybe they don't want to play baseball. A lot of kids with autism, again, playing video games is a preferred activity. Or playing, coloring might be a preferred activity, but we need things that get them moving. Swimming is a preferred activity. I found that in a research article. It also gets them moving. So swimming can also increase their how active they are. So maybe swimming is a preferred activity. So I'm going to recommend that the community provide more swimming activities for kids with autism, specifically that are one-on-one. Those are my recommendations. Then, what resources are going to be needed to implement those recommendations? If I'm specifically thinking about a swim program, I'm going to need a swimming pool. That's the facility. I'm going to need a swimming pool. My staff, I'm going to need volunteers, or I'm going to need I'm going to need money to pay for staff to be able to provide that one-on-one support for kids. Maybe I'm going to need some resources from the university to help me evaluate my research plan. I'm probably going to need some government funding to pay for these facilities, to pay for equipment, maybe to pay for staff if I can't get volunteers. Then I want a small component looking at how you're going to evaluate whether your initiative is successful. I'm going to choose to evaluate this in two different ways. First, I'm going to have kids wear Fitbits. So I'm going to track their activity level. So I'm able to say, how do kids' activity level, how has it changed over time? So maybe they'll wear their Fitbit for a month before they get access to the swimming activities. Then I'll have them wear their Fitbit after they have access to their swim activities. And of course the Fitbit will be waterproof because they're going to be in the pool. I'm also going to have parents complete a pre-post survey on the children's attitudes towards and participation in physical activity. So keep in mind when we're thinking about evaluation, it doesn't necessarily have to be specifically looking at the change in the problem. You can look at changes in people's attitudes and beliefs towards something, because ultimately you're going to have to change the kids' attitudes towards physical activity if you want to change their actual levels of activity. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about your evaluation mechanism. And then I'm going to have one paragraph again at the end that kind of pulls things together and is a nice little conclusion paragraph. Then I'm going to have my list of references. This is going to be a separate page. Is not factored into your 10 to 12 page limit. So this is worth 20% of your final grade. Please contact me with any questions. So it's going to be 10 to 12 pages total. The 10 to 12 pages does not include the reference page, and it does not include the title page if you have one. So I want 10 to 12 pages of like content, not fluff. Okay, as always, contact me with questions. Thanks.